start, can everybody hear me? If you can't, raise your hand and just let me know. Okay, there's going to be a couple of things different about tonight, so I hope you'll bear with me. One of the things is that we're not going to do a Q&A. Instead, we're going to extend the discussion with you. So as the talk is proceeding, and you have thoughts formulating, and maybe you take an idea that's being presented and you extend it, and we can do this verbally, but there's also, with the register, there'll be cards going around, small cards. And if you want to write something that extends some of the thinking in your talk, I'll collect all of these and I'll send them to Yve. And one reason I'm sending them to Yve is that her presence tonight will be a telepresence. I'll go into the specifics of that. But in this talk about speaking being, we're actually going to embody the speaking being in 3 different ways. And the first way will be through me. So I'll be speaking the first 20 minutes. Then we'll have a singing interlude for around 7 minutes. And then we'll go back and this will be Yve reading the second part. So first I'm just going to introduce Yve and our guest, the LUNATRAKTORS. So Yve Lomax is a visual artist and writer. She has exhibited and published widely. Her major publications include Figure Calling, Pure Means, Passionate Being, and Writing the Image. She's a senior research tutor in photography and art department at RCA, and also the director of and editor for Copy Press and its Readers Union. And there's 2 Copy Press books on the table, one of which is Yve's latest book, Figure Calling, and they're at a discount price for tonight. The LUNATRAKTORS were launched in February 2017. They're a performance research duo who make resonant spaces. The mainstays of their practice are folk singing and body percussion. They begin with the question, what do we have if we have nothing? Without our technology or tools, without internet, books, or archives, without visas or bank accounts, what we have left is what we can do with our bodies, what we have learned by heart. Weaving traditional ballads with contemporary influences, they strip folk back to its raw elements, combining materials from folk music, installation, and performance art, theater, literature, and philosophy, body percussion, harmonic singing, tap dance, and live looping. So the talk is called From Intimacy Without Relation to Demand, Rhythmos. And feel free to read while I read Yve's first talk. Part 1, Intimacy Without Relation. An enunciation of written words forms a spoken performance. It is an endeavor to find out what and how to think in the times that make today. And at its simplest, in the first fold of its being, it is song. It is song engendered by speech alone. A song engendered with the age of speech alone. These words that I say now have been written with the words of the late 19th century poet Stephen Mallarme, and a few 21st century words of the philosopher Quentin Nassu, running beside them, falling in and out of them, and sometimes falling together with them. A written text is enunciated. The text that is spoken out remains present throughout the performance, and in many respects can be seen as a score which almost anyone could read. In a very short text entitled What Voice Brings to the Text, a philosopher is to be found dreaming of philosophical texts being read out loud. Here are texts that comprise ideas and concepts that expand and contract, and a voice has a capacity to trace, voice, the rhythms of these movements. What voice brings to a text is, in an act of reading, the possibility of bringing forth, in the words of Gilles Deleuze, new perceptions and new affects that surround the read and spoken concept. The enunciating voice takes its cue here. The voice is not singing, yet rhythms and modulations are made heard as new affects arise around the read word, spoken idea, or spoken concept. And with this audibility, I'll say that speech makes song, song engendered with the aid of speech alone. A song of speech, song engendered with the aid of speech alone. With this song, which isn't the spoken singing, Sprechgesang, or parlando, that sometimes takes place in opera, we can't ignore the song born from the rhythm's beat, from patterns of syllables stressed and unstressed, and which gives rise to prosody. Here is language submitted to the syllabic count that produces and establishes traditions of poetic meter and verse. And here is the poem that exerts a formidable exactitude in being composed within a given constraint of numbered syllables, pauses, and lines. And there, the verse that, while maintaining its own precision, acts freely and purposely as such measure. And all of this is precisely what the poet Stéphane Mallarme would wish us not to ignore. In The Number and the Siren, Meursault asserts us to the music, in fact, a song, that in two short works of prose and written with a poetic concision that almost hurts, Mallarme suggests, in the situation in company of poets, to take back what is ours. Here is Meursault, read out loud. For we know that Mallarme contested music's privilege with regard to song. Only poetry, because it engenders song with the aid of speech alone, is in the position truly to be able to produce a unity between thought and music. It is thus a matter of framing music from strings of brass and wood, so as to restore it to verse, end quote. At times, in fact, quite often, you will hear snatches of song, of syllabic rhythms and poetic meter arising in the most ordinary of utterances of language as well as philosophical and political prose. And to the metrical rhythms and poetics born from syllabic formations, there is to add the rhythms arising from accentuation. Inflections, modulations, emphasis rising and falling. For sure, it's a matter of where with each word, syntagm, or sentence the accent is put. And it is also a matter of accent where a pattern of pronunciation, stretch, pitch, stress, pitch, and timbre will be taken as a characteristic and with which you will be, rarely not, located, classed, perhaps fixed, perhaps low, perhaps low. Rhythms arising through poetic meter or accentuation certainly affirm song engendered with the aid of speech alone. But there is another song to be heard here. And this is the song of speech, where the linguistic truly gets going, as at the same time calling into question, as intolerable, the division that cuts, separates, and produces the linguistic and the non-linguistic. Yes, this is the song of language, born of, in words of Mallarme, the initiative of words. And this is where words, be they named nouns, terms, or verbs, light each other up through reciprocal reflections like a virtual swooping of fire across precious stones, replacing the primacy of perceptible rhythm of respiration or the classic lyric breath or personal feeling driving sentences. The poet Stéphane Mallarme wrote the words just uttered almost at the end of the 19th century. They are to be found amid other words in the text entitled Crisis of Verse, of which Mallarme says invents the critical poem. What is called theory and what is called poetry fall together. Indeed, there is a coincidence, and with it we enter a time where the dense and light, the complex and simple, happen at the same time. Mallarme is credited as an author, yet what he is considering is a song that implies, folds within it, the disappearance of poets and authors speaking as they themselves yield to the initiative to words. And as the poet and author give way to what words can do, Mallarme writes, quote, "It is not through the elementary sounds of brasses, strings, or wood, but undeniably through the intellectual word at its height that there should result, with plenitude and obviousness, as the totality of relations existing in everything, the system otherwise known as music." A few paragraphs earlier, you will find Mallarme speaking of a tendency, perhaps the most decisive tendency of writing. Call it, he does, the literary art. And it is writing that without enclosing reality, liberates a fistful of dust as it liberates, I quote, "the volatile dispersal of the spirit, which has to do with nothing but the musicality of everything." The musicality of everything. I'll say that the initiative of words can make appearances from poem to prose, paying little attention to literary or disciplinary divisions. replacing rhythms of respiration, the classic lyric breath, or any personal feeling driving the utterances of a sentence. What voice brings to this initiative is, in making heard the affects of words upon another, a making heard of taking place language. It seems almost too much to say, but there is a demand. Without the aid of, but yet not in rivalry with, strings, brass, and wood, this voice carries, as it is itself, the song of speaking being. Song of speaking being. Speaking being. Two words are held tight together, and what is affirmed is an inseparability between speaking and being. A spoken performance testifies to speaking being, but let's make no mistake. Speaking being doesn't refer to a being who happens to be speaking about this or that, but rather being speaking. What voice brings to a text, expresses of a text, and gives utterance to is being in the mode of speaking. And what truly is to be heard is being in the mode of language. Being as language, as, utterly. It is being thus, utterly. Being as the proper place of mode, as, utterly, in this case, linguistic being. And no division is cut that produces the linguistic and the non-linguistic. And nothing of yourself is left behind in some supposed non-linguistic realm, which is to say, you are your utmost self. The song of speaking is what a voice brings to a text for all to hear, and this is nothing other than an affirmation of linguistic being living in the world. It is nothing other than the song of language, and song is the best word here, for with the being and language of the world there comes not representation and recording, but rather the world arising musically. Musically. There is no other word for it. Here it is. Song arises exactly at the moment that language ceases to speak on the basis of something, reality, being, substance, or self. Presuppose. I'm going to read that something. Here it is. Song arises exactly at the moment that language ceases to speak on the basis of something, reality, being, substance, or self, presupposed. And this is precisely when voice comes to a text and gives you and me not only new perception, affects, and perhaps the surprise of never having heard that fragment of ordinary eloquence before, but also, Mallarme, the object named, bathed in a brand new atmosphere. Song in the musical arising of the world arises with the world taking place in language as language, without something, anything, outside of or before language that stands as presupposition to it. And this is an object ceasing to be supposed to be there before a word is uttered of it. This is dust, liberated from a non-linguistic realm and sparkling in language and the morning sun. This is the object bathed in a brand new atmosphere. And it is also the intellectual word at its height, and from which, to quote Mallarme yet again, there is no good reason to exclude from poetry. Of presupposition, there's so much to say, but I have a few words. What is paramount to say, what I cannot not say, is that language is embroiled with presupposition to the extent that some would assert that as soon as there is language, there is presupposition. Do we not learn to presuppose through language? In many respects, it is true, or at least we must recognize that operating in language is a presuppositional power that gets us to believe that the thing named by language is a something already there, over there, and as with dust, a mute, non-linguistic something. But what is overlooked is that the non-linguistic is fundamentally a linguistic category. The non-linguistic that we, perhaps, always a perhaps, think we are grasping through language, that mute dust imagined to be over there, is only a shadow of language. Time and time again, the philosopher Giorgio Agamben reminds us that the non-linguistic is a presupposition of language. In The Use of Bodies, the final volume of 20-odd years' endeavor of writing, researching, philosophizing, he picks up on Plato's use of the word shadows. The non-linguistic that we think we are grasping through language is only a shadow of language. Be aware of the presuppositional power of language. Be aware of the linguistics shadow, yet also be aware of the idea of language as freed from the shadow. Each word that would name or denote is liberated from presupposing something non-linguistic. Plato had such an idea. Indeed, it became his idea, and there's nothing mystical about this idea. The idea, Plato's idea, has language embracing the arising of things as not a presupposition to it. Here it is from Agamben, quote, "The idea is the word freed from its shadow." And with the words immediately following, Agamben draws my attention to Plato's use of the word, the thing itself. The idea is thus embraced as a non-presuppositional word, and what appears with this idea is the thing itself. For each name and word emancipated from the shadow of a non-linguistic realm, Plato will add itself. Here is dust itself. There is nothing obscure about this dust as uttered now. It is dust insofar as a word name is saying, signifying dust. It is not simply an object signified or said. It is also the act of language, saying, signifying. The thing itself is both, and inseparably so, the object, freed from presupposition, and language, freed from presupposition. It is upon this inseparability that the idea arises, and there is nothing whatsoever mystical about it. So, language is signifying, yet no object, no non-linguistic thing or circumstance stands or falls as a presupposition to it. No link is to be found that finds language bringing the representation of, which is also the presupposition of this or that. What transpires is a void of representation. I've italicized the words, but for a spoken performance, I don't think it will be heard. Nonetheless, these words, along with quite a few others from Agamben's The Use of Bodies, have been read and bleed into these words that are now coming to understand that when a representational relation, a link, becomes palpable as absent, language is freed from its shadow, and what's more, a certain contact can take place. A certain contact can take place. Yes, it is important that I understand what a link, that's to say, relation, does. In one respect, it is very simple. Relation links through presupposing what it links as unrelated. Say that again. In one respect, it is very simple. Relation links through presupposing what it links as unrelated. Indeed, the relation posits its elements, this or that, by taking them as unrelated. That a word or phrase denotes this or that, signifies or refers to this or that hence installs a representational link to this or that, makes effective the presupposition that word and world are unrelated. But at this very moment, no relation is to be found between word and world. And this is so for the very reason that no presupposition, no representational link is casting them as unrelated. For a while, I really can't say long. Nothing is to be found between word and world, between language and being, between speaking being and life. Nothing whatsoever, which means there is contact. Nothing of no contact. Extinguishing the presuppositional power of language and beholding the consequence that is a void of representation, what transpires is object, say dust, and language in contact. Contact. Here is another way to say it. Quote, an intimacy without relation. And yet another way to say this intimacy, dwelling. Or let's say touching. Indeed, of Plato's idea, Agamben would say, the idea is a word. The idea is a word that does not denote but touches. And a little later he will say, thought at its greatest summit does not represent but touches the intelligible. Now, I can give a kiss as an example of intimacy without relation, but this would be the kiss that lingers so long that any experience of a point of tangency between lips has developed into a not knowing what is what or who is who, and become the rhythm and ease of dwelling. And that is dwelling as ethos. And that is dwelling as how. And that is dwelling as. It is simply the full-blown existence of as. There's nothing like it. The example of the kiss, what is key is that we have lingered so long that the existence of contact or touching has ceased to be bound by or defined by materiality. In fact, and this is truly quite beautiful, the time has so stretched, that touching has so expanded, that materiality and non-materiality cannot settle as two unrelated elements. And this is what is happening as language and the being of the world touch and are in immediate contact. They are as, being as language, as, utterly. Again, this is being in the mode of being language. And with this mode, nothing is found left behind in some separate non-linguistic realm. And why not call it the musical arising of the world? And why the word musical is perhaps the best word is for the reason that free from its shadow, language isn't taking place upon the separation of something separated from it. It is musical, but God only knows it is political as well. Time and time again, I find that Western culture would have separation as its foundation. It goes something like this, and I say it with a little sophistication. Something cuts a division and constitutes a sphere from which it separates itself, and accordingly has this act of separation become its origin and foundation. Power founds itself by separating something from it, that through this very separation it will henceforth capture and control. Government separates itself from the being of the world so as to render it administratable, manageable, indeed governable. And as government constitutes itself upon this separation, the ungoverned is produced. Some would call it anarchy. Politics divides life and then ceaselessly goes about its practice of formulating relations, hence representation. And with that which has been separated, the so-called people is a good example here. And I must include the Western metaphysical apparatus that puts in place a substance, subject, or being that is always already prior to and separable from any thing, mode, or form or life that happens to happen to it. But at this moment, language is taking place without remainder. Nothing preceding is found or left behind. Nothing is placed in a separate realm, or for whatever reason is excluded. It is language as song, the world arising musically, and with it both dust and this speaker, Christmas, are become the rhythm and ease of dwelling. And that is dwelling as the full-blown existence of as, and that is mode. Yet again, this is nothing other than being in the mode of being language. Yes, this is what a spoken performance can show us. Representation and relation are not happening here, and that's truly political. But what is happening, how things are happening, is nothing other than a modality. Nothing short of a modal ontology for which there is no being that pre-exists its mode and no life separable from its forms. Another way to put this, no content is ever separable from its form. Mallarme's song, engendered by speech alone, took me again to the musical and everything. The musical being, once, many years ago, a twittering tree also took me there. And what is demanded now of me and you is to be in touch with this music, and not as some pretty turned phrase. What is that rhythm of dwelling that dust and myself are becoming? What is that rhythm that forms the song of language, that is irreducible to patterns of pronunciation or syllabic prosody, or the classic lyric breath? What is this rhythmos that makes the musical arising of the world, which makes language become song? There, I've said it. And I'm not the only one to have said it. Rhythmos is nothing other than modal being itself. Better still, this is music and mode sharing an intimacy without relation. And here's what Giorgio Agamben says as he cites Emile Benveniste from his General Linguistics published in the 1970s. Here it is. One of the fundamental meanings of mode is in fact the musical one of rhythm. Benveniste has shown that rhythmos, is a technical term of pre-Socratic philosophy that designates form, not in its fixity, for this Greek prefers to use the word schema, but in the moment in which it is assumed by what is moving, what is mobile and fluid. Mode expresses this rhythmic and not schematic nature of being. Being as a flux and substance modulates itself and feeds out its rhythm, It does not fix and schematize itself in the modes. Mode is rhythm, and this is language and objects in the world in contact and sharing an intimacy without relation. A possibility of a spoken performance is to show this. It is the music of being, and here.
I'm just going to say a couple of words about this before we start, which is one of the ways that we like to compose is by really reading and reading and reading and letting the words, you kind of hallucinate a tune from them. So this is the first book of Ecclesiastes, kind of mishmash of English translations.
Vanity, oh vanity, all is vanity. What profit have we all from all our work under the sun? A generation passes, a generation comes, with the earth still turning. The sun also rises, and the sun goes down to his empty hurries, there to rise again. The wind turns to the north, turns back to the south, turning round, it whirls around, it whirls about continually. All the streams flow to the sea never overflows. Back to where they came from, there the rivers go. Everything is toil, words cannot express. The eye is never satisfied, the ear is never filled. That which has been is that which will be, and that which was done is that which will be done. There is nothing entirely new under the sun. Can we say of anything, see this is new? It has already been in the times that came before us. There are no memories left of ages past, and there will be none of this in the ages that come after. I'm a teacher, I have been a king, I have given all my heart to learning everything. Lord, it is a sore occupation the gods have given us to occupy all our time with. I have seen all of the works that are done under the sun. Oh yes, all is vanity, vexation of the spirit. That which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is lacking, it cannot be counted. I said to myself, I am the wisest. I gave my heart to wisdom, to madness and folly. With much wisdom comes much grief. They that increase their knowledge just increase all their sorrows. Vanity of vanity, all is vanity. What profit have we all from all our work under the sun? A generation passes, A generation comes with the earth still turning.
Something more that has to be said. In fact, it would be better to say that something further has to be said and is bringing a demand. It's not that something has been forgotten and late in the day remembered. No, that's not the case at all. But there is a demand. What is it that demands so? In the first place, it is demand itself. What does a demand demand? Straight away, I need to understand that a demand is not a command, and nor is it a duty of an obligation or the must of an imperative. What is more, the object of a demand is not a logical implication contained in the thing that is demanding. When one thing demands another, we are to understand that when the first thing is, the other will also be. However, it is in the nature of demand that the latter neither logically follows nor is obliged or forced to exist. But what matters with a demand is the possibility of something. A demand does not demand the reality of something, but first and foremost, its possibility. It is possibility that truly matters. Better still, what matters is a possibility that contains a demand. And this is not only possibility demanding to become a reality, but also, and significantly so, being, whatever, demanding its possibility. And what is to be acknowledged is that both existence and possibility are here invested with demand. And this changes everything. Demand becomes a threshold where existence and possibility lose fixity, come into contact with each other and fall together. In fact, I can't say that there is anything on either side of the demand. For what was thought the object of the demand and what demands are now found only in the middle of each other. And we can call this a medial process. A medial process. Let's also say that this process troubles any attribution of the demanding verb to a subject that's placed outside the process, which governs it like a sovereign agent. With an activity taking place that at once implicates, refers to, and affects both the object of demand and what demands, the verb of demanding is found in the middle, which is what defines mediality. Existence is demand, and possibility is a demand. And what demand is doing here is unsettling the fixing and presumption of a pre-existent. And how well this is put with these words? The expressed has no existence outside of its expression. In the middle of the expressed and the expression, there is the tension of a demand. Now, I must return to the demand that has me finding out something about the nature of demand. What demands so? It is the sayable. And what this word translates is the lectern of the linguistic theory of the Stoics. The sayable, also known as the expressible, is not a matter of language signifying, representing, or denoting. Nor is it what histories, or laws, or codes of conduct, or social formations permit me and you to say. The lectern, be it of ancient, medieval, or modern times, is not a thing. Rather, it is a thing, whatever, insofar as it can be said, which involves an incorporeal transformation, an invisible event. The sayable exists in everything you and I utter. We are disclosing it with every word appearing on the page, every voice giving forth loudly or whispering in your ear. It is here now with these words, a spoken performance is a testimony to it. The sayable is no existent thing. There is no substance to it, no body or mark to uphold. For the Stoics, the lecton is an intermediary entity, and this in the middle is what Gilles Deleuze brings to the surface of, and has playing on the surface of his almighty book, The Logic of Sense, and in which the sayable becomes the expressible. Now, The Logic of Sense is a book formed from assigning a privileged place to the philosophy of the Stoics, and a series of figures that point to one another and exist only on the length and width of a pure surface, which of course can always be folded. He says it's a convoluted story. His folds are many, mine but a few. In the first instance, I simplified. Here is book unfold. For the Stoics, what matters are bodies, and their mixing together. This is what constitutes the corporality of the world. Even a mist over the prairie is a body. And what results from the states of affairs made by bodies as they mix, intermingle, come to reinforce or destroy each other are affects, effects. Playing at the surface of things, effects are not those of any physical stuff. There's nothing to prod, poke or shove, which is to say that effects differ in nature from the bodily states of affairs from which they result. An effect is not a body, it is an incorporeal entity. And this incorporeal entity is what gets expressed, is the expressible of bodies and their states of affairs, being said, being in language. It is with respect to bodies and language an expressible entity. And here I can add another fold. In the Logic of Sense, amid a series of at least 34 folds, the expressible entity will be called sense. Sense is the attribute of bodies mixing and becoming what is expressed, the expressible, by a proposition such as snow is white. Sense is expressed in language, but sense is not at all a matter of what is denoted or signified. Language gives expression to sense, but not at all as the name of bodies or properties, not at all as the subject or predicate. He tells me the Stoics discovered it. Sense is an event. He also said, they said it all, neither word nor body, neither sensible representation nor rational representation. Although the attribute of bodies, the expressible in whatever comes to be said in language, the said event merges with neither. Deleuze will speak of sense as a frontier or a boundary that has no thickness, no substance whatsoever. It's event. And time again, Deleuze will say that the event goes in two directions at once. On the one side, bodies, and mixing, actions and passions, and on the other side, language. But the incorporeal sense event, the expressible entity, remains intermediate, in the middle, yes, just like a frontier. He says, that's Deleuze, but exactly who's speaking, he says the sense event distinguishes itself from the two sides that, as an intermediary frontier line, it establishes and separates. But the separation is precisely so that the event of language is confused neither with the words and propositions snow is white that express it, nor the bodies and states of affairs from which it ensues. Yet, going in two directions at once, the event would be nothing if it did not, I quote, finally articulate what it separates. And with that articulation, the frontier line of the event, in the words of Deleuze, connects the interiority of language to the exteriority of things. Expressibility inheres, insists, as he would say, in language, making possible expressible meanings and the event of language which is happening now. Although neither word nor thing, the intermediate event forms a process where what goes one way also goes the other way. Indeed, shortly after saying the frontier line of the event articulates what it separates, Deleuze declares that it operates on both sides by means of one and the same incorporeal power, which on the one hand is defined as that which occurs in states of affairs, and on the other is that which insists in propositions such as snow is white. So, Amid the convoluted story, which it is, of a series of figures pointing to one another, I find the Stoics' lecton, the expressible, that is an event, is an incorporeal, and what's more akin to me, or at least to my ears, a demand and its medial nature. That's to say, the demand that plays on both sides, at once implicating, referring to, and affecting both what demands and the object of the demand. And that is the demand where existence and possibility are found in the middle of each other, and sharing a proximity and nearness that knows no measure. And then someone is saying, it's Agamben, him again, and why not? Is saying in the use of bodies, is saying the world demands its sayability. Expressibility becomes sayability. And turn back a page, and you'll hear Agamben saying of demand, it corresponds neither to language nor to the world, neither to thought nor to the real, but to that articulation. And a few words later, the problem, however, is precisely that of how one is to think this articulation. It cannot be something like a substantial connection. And then turn over the page, recto to verso, and what happens between world and language is, he says, a pure demand. And quickly followed by, after a long dash, namely, pure sayability. Sayability is a demand, and it is the incorporate event that goes in two directions at once. The world demands its sayability, and sayability is demanded by language. Demand is in the middle of both sides. It puts world and word in contact and articulates them without a substantial connection. It is intimacy without relation. Yes, I'll say that. And he would say that in reality there is only sayability in its demand. Word and thing are only two of its fragments. World and language are transformed by demand as it produces an immeasurable proximity between them. With demand tirelessly playing on both sides, I can hardly speak of sides. I can't say what comes first and what comes second. In fact, I really can't speak of the one and the other. For the demand, the sheer proximity between world and language is nothing other than a process of modification, the making of a mode, the mode of being as language. The world demands. Demand demands the possibility and existence of being in the mode that is language. And in the use of bodies, the words that have been read and bled into these words, you'll find the suggestion that demand is more primary than some primary stuff called substance, which for so long and long enough has been right as being. Here it is. Between being and mode, there is a demand. Being is a demand of mode, just as mode is a demand of being. Again, existence and possibility in the middle of each other. And with the mediality that expression here, being is never to be taken as pre-existence, a what that comes first, followed by a how. Again, Rhythmos is nothing other than mode of being. The air is thick with it, it's palpable. Say it. It is with demand that rhythm begins, arises, begins again and again. Perhaps more primary than some primary stuff, demand is a power with which being and mode, identity and difference, are found only amid each other and falling together. Is power the best name for it? This much I can say, demand has no recourse to a subject outside the process which governs it as an agent. Indeed, the medial process of demand flies in the face of a power that constitutes itself by separating something from it that it will henceforth control. The concept, nature of demand, that has been brought to my attention is that of a medial process where the object demanded and the subject demanding are both affected and found in the middle of each other. And this is akin to a verb form called the middle voice, found in Latin and, for example, Greek krisai, to use. With this verb, krisai, you don't find a subject that uses an object, but rather a subject that is constituted only through the using, which is to say that the subject is found only in the middle of the process, and consequently the subject who makes use and the object used are separate. After the briefest of pauses, I say that what lies at the heart of it, of sayability, of the mode and rhythm of being as language, is a demand for, and to use Agamben's words for one more time, the word not to distance us from things, but to keep them close, even closer. The word that does not denote, but touches, a language liberated from its shadow, intimacy without relation undusted itself. Now I understand the demand playing in it. A demand playing in language, and the same demand playing in the morning sun. Soft morning sparkle dust. What I'm holding dear is that the demand for the word not to distance us from the world has no recourse to a subject, power, cause, or higher being that is external to the process. No one's giving orders, no command, a duty, or imperative. On the contrary, it's like being touched lightly to be given something in your hand that you know in your heart so much can turn upon. Pivotal, say political, yet that could be too much to say. But this much I can say. The demand for an immeasurable proximity between word and thing is not asking for a political activity that speaks in the name of something raised above in the heavens. In fact, the demand for and the demand that gives rise to proximity between world and language does not leave heaven detached from earth, but brings it down to keep it close and even closer, which is to have it happen amid language. For you and I to experience the closeness between word and thing, which is as much mundane as it is heavenly, is not an experience of a world stuffed full of some things and separated yet tacked onto them, and this is where the distance starts, but some things that are said of them, such as the grass is green. In an essay first published in 1984 called The Thing Itself, Agamben says you forget to abandon and portray sayability so that language might speak about something. The sun is warm, the snow is white. Yet for all the betrayal, sayability and the demand for the word not to distance us from things that lies at the heart of it continues to insist, to persist. Yes, demand has perseverance in it. Spinoza would use the word conatus. Perhaps we are oblivious to the demand for the word to keep us close, and even closer to things when we say the grass is green, and introduce or simply let be a separation and hence distance between a subject and what is said of it. But the demand demands, let's say desires, that subject and predicate be indivisible and give us the experience of the indivisible event of the sun's being warm, the snow's being white, the grasses being green. Now, there are situations in language, with language and so many different languages, where something called subject and something said about it fall together and leave no space to be filled by linking copula that says is, nor requires the insertion of a verb for the completion of predication or assertion. Now this falling together, this absence, yet no lack of copula or verb, is what linguistics call the nominal sentence. It is Snow White and Jesus Messiah. It is an inseparability that, however, does not form a proper name. It is Westerwater, and it is sun warming sparkling dust. In his Problems of General Linguistics, Benveniste not only writes of Rhythmos, but also of the nominal sentence. He says it's a highly peculiar syntactical form, but is widespread and utterly distinct from a verbal sentence. And what is characteristic of it, that it places the utterances beyond the subjectivity of the speaker. Here is something born from, as Mallarme would say, the initiative of words. But picking up on Benveniste' study of the nominal sentence, Agamben says in his commentary on the letters of Paul's letters to the Romans that faith, for Paul, is an experience beyond subject as beyond predicate, and at the same time equally an experience of the word, of the nearness of the word. It is a matter of the nearness of the word, but it is not a verbal sentence that expresses faith, rather it is a nominal syntagma, as Agamben would say. Not the grass is green, the sun is warm, rather indivisible events and inseparability between subject and predicate. A matter of faith or not. What I can say is that the nominal sentence, the syntagm, expresses modality. That's to say, being as its mode. For example, the mode of warm being sun, or green being grass. The nominal sentence is, to quote Benveniste quoting, a state and the modalities of that state. The state is not presupposed, it is not there before modality happens to it. Rather, it happens all at once. There is, again, quoting Benveniste quoting, an equation of equivalence. With this equivalence, no word is resting upon presupposition, and together, sequence, and no matter which way, form an indivisible event. Sun, morning, sparkling dust. And it is nothing short of the musical arising of the world. And with presupposition not at work, there opens the chance for anyone whomsoever to experience the modality of being as language. And if we grab the chance and hold it dear, hold it tight, we ourselves become immersed in, perhaps enraptured by, the demand that is at once sayability and rhythmos. And in the extreme epochal situation that Agamben says is today, holding this dear, we would become aware of what he asserts human beings today don't manage to have awareness of, which is precisely the rhythm of being. That is it.